In lesson 2.1 here, we're going to take a look at the different types of growing space you can use for your microgreens production. And this overall is going to be the biggest challenge, is where are you going to do this production? Because not only do you need the growing space, but you need all the complementary spaces to go with it. You can do this as a home production system, but we'll talk a little bit about that and the challenges as we get into it. So we're going to look primarily at 3 growing spaces. 1 are covered benches. 2 is sort of home or warehouse production, and then 3 is a greenhouse or hoop house. You can grow microgreens in the ground, but I'm not going to get into that here because this system is really meant to be an infrastructure-based system. Part of that is to actually just reduce wear and tear on your body and avoiding bending over to harvest stuff out of the ground. So let's start with benches. So when I talk about benches, I'm just going to show you a picture here of the system I started out with in 2009 with my production system. And I really like these types of benches for several reasons. Number 1 is they do give you some protection from the environment, which means rain, which means sun, because you can put shade cloth over them. They're very easy to build, they're inexpensive, and they're very expandable. It's really easy to add on to these. They're really adaptable in terms of like having plastic on the front and sides, or lifting that off to have mesh to get better airflow. And you actually do have a certain amount of climate control in here, as you can put heaters and systems like this. So in terms of a way, depending on your climate, of getting started very quickly and inexpensively, the bench system works really, really well. Here in Vancouver, I can grow microgreens from about mid-April to mid-September in this system reliably, and I could push that a little farther with a little bit of heating and a bit more control. This is a very basic bench here, and I'll kind of show you the structure. It's basically made of 2 components. One is the platform here, you see, as I'm putting things together. And then the second component is the sort of posts or braces that go between each of the platforms. So you see I'm just sort of putting things together in sections here, and I could probably do a section in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So they really, really do go up very quickly, and they're quite easy to take down and move as well. So here we are, as we've got the sections up, we add some bars at the back and some beams across the top. And essentially we're making an enclosed bench. Another great advantage about something like this is that you don't need a permit for this. You're not really building a building. It really is just a glorified shelf. For this one, the posts there are actually synthetic lumber. So I am trying to think about the hygiene and sanitation. Even though I'm using lumber for the bench tops, that was covered with plywood and then a sheet of coroplast, which could also be stainless steel. So what you are still trying to think about having a sanitary environment here. As I showed you on the images, around the outside, and I'm going to go back to the first one, the ends have a 1/4-inch mesh on the end to give you some good airflow through the system while keeping it rodent proof. And then on the front is more like a mesh screen. So in this section here, this is all mesh, and these are doors that actually open up, so you can easily access things. There's just hinges on the top there. The top I've used a 6mm plastic, and on the back is coroplast as well, or you could use something like twin wall, like a good polycarbonate greenhouse material. So there's lots of different ways to do this. You can sort of do it inexpensively, and then add on to it later if you want and make things a little more advanced in a way. So without the hardware cloth, you can still get some pests in here, and your climate control is limited. But I actually have had success with a little heater and growing stuff in here in January and December here in Vancouver. And we don't have super cold winters like other areas of Canada, but we're still getting down to 0 or -5 degrees Celsius. And a small heater in this space, if it's well designed and well insulated, actually will give you enough heat to generate a crop. And this kind of system is a really good candidate for having a good solid base and having heating right on the bottom. And so what happens is that heat really heats up the soil to keep things going well, and then that heat will radiate up. So it might be cooler up at the top, but you've got a good microclimate right around where your crop is growing. So there is a lot of really good options there. There is a link, or I will put a link in the Teachable platform so you could see the blog of me putting these benches together. Originally, you can see these corner brackets in here. I will just add that they're very, very important. When I was doing my first prototype, I had started production without putting those corner brackets in, and I paid the price for that. So unfortunately, yeah, you've got to be careful and make sure things are well supported. So yeah, just again, taking a look at the sections here and the benches, I really, even though this is what I started with, I would use these benches again in a second. They really, really do work well, and there are a lot of options there. So if you're looking for a quick start, it's definitely a great way to start. So here's some adaptations. You can see here the bench is open. It's a really simple system. And then here what I did is I created a little bit of vertical space. And things can't really grow in that bottom area, but that was sort of where we would stick wheatgrass just to give it an extra day and to keep it out of the sun and then prepping it for sales. So that worked really well to use that vertical space. That could also be a germination space if need be. And then here, just getting a look down, you get a sense of here's the irrigation in. So this is just a simple timer and a micro spray system. So this works really, really well. So I really think if you're limited in infrastructure, I would really think you should consider the bench. They work really, really well, and they're easy to build. Okay, so let's move over to indoor production. A lot of people start with this type of production, and I'm going to show you a production system I had in my living room, and I believe this was the winter of 2012. And so even though I would advise you not to develop a business plan that is run out of your living room, this is a great way to prototype a slightly bigger system. As I mentioned earlier, starting small and growing over time is a really good way to approach things. So this is the type of system that allows you to do this. It's simple benches. Actually, it's actually a tall bench with a metal shelving on top and just using fluorescent lights that are adjustable here. Even though this is in my living room, this could easily be in a spare bedroom, in a basement, or in a garage, ideally. And ideally, if you're going to do home production, you want it separated from your living space. There's a lot of things to discuss around the benefits and pitfalls of home production. Obviously, doing home production is great because you're doing it right from your home. You're already paying either rent or mortgage, so it's not an additional cost. But it's not really a viable business model, because what's going to happen in most cases is you're going to get a health inspector who may at some point want to check out your facility. And in most municipalities, doing something like this won't be considered an appropriate use of a residence. That's not always the case. And here's a situation where doing this in a garage or using a system like this with benches outdoors would be more appropriate. It can also have a very big impact on your home life, having something like this going. This was just a brief thing I did to test winter production before trying to go to a year-round model. So this system is pretty simple. Just getting a little closer look here, you can see that the lights are adjustable and they're very close to the crop. And the other thing is I'm doing 2 harvests a week, so you can see the crop growing here, but actually just below, if you notice, is the next crop. So actually you would grow one crop on top of the other, and then you'd be ready for, when you harvest the top one, the second one is ready to be exposed. So here's the situation where the bottom one has been harvested, and there's just a little bit of lag before that gets into the next crop. And you can see how close we're putting the lights to the crop in this situation to keep things growing. Here's just another look at those lights and the setup, and just a little bit of insight into, yeah, this is basically some living space here. And there's just the string on the lights to make them adjustable. So yeah, this was a simple system using just fluorescent lights. I'll talk a little bit about lighting later, but using lights with a cool white light or something with a high K value, 5,000 or above. At this level, I could do 18 trays twice a week for harvests, and that would generate about $700 a week in revenue. You do need to keep things warmer than room temperature to get good production. And in this case, the heating was baseboard heating right below the bench, so that radiated right upwards, and it was perfect. You do need good airflow, so having windows that can open and allow air to come through. You want to put some fans in there, but you also want to make sure you're controlling things like humidity, because you don't want to get humidity buildup because it could do damage to where you're living. One of the challenges with this is you do need to do hand watering, and you want to be careful because you don't want to be getting water all over the place. Though with the trays really pushed up against each other, you can do it fairly easily, and I didn't have any trouble with doing hand watering in this system. Working indoors, you've always got really good climate control, and you've also got usually really good pest control. So in many ways, home production is a great system, but yeah, there are some things to consider, and it's not a system that can really grow. It's limited in that sense. So if your business is successful, how do you grow out of your house into a new space, which is going to be more, quote unquote, an approvable facility? So here's just one more look at the system here and how that all grows. So I had some great production with this system. You can do some good indoor stuff. Just keep in mind you need to set yourself up for success, which means if your business does do well, you need to grow into a sort of health authority approvable space. So another option is having some sort of indoor warehouse space, and this could be a garage or something like that, some sort of outbuilding. And so here's a really good look at a shelving system where you're doing multiple shelves within a space. They're well spaced out, good lighting. So I like systems like this. This is sort of a more open concept, and if you have something like this with ground floor, with floor heating that radiates up, you can do really, really well. Two things I'll comment on with a system like this. The wooden shelves are effective and inexpensive to build, but they over time are really hard to maintain, to keep sanitary. Wood in this case is not a great material for shelving when you've got a lot of soil and a lot of water. This design is pretty good to minimize wood contact, but eventually you're going to get more water and stuff soaking into the wood, and it could cause problems. So I really highly recommend very quickly getting into like steel shelves, ideally with an epoxy coating, which are very easy to clean and keep sanitary. The spacing here is good, and so you can see there's very good airflow. Another thing I would critique about a system like this is the bottom layer of trays there. These are too close to the ground, and these are very, very prime for contamination. So your feet are way too close to those, and it's too easy for things to easily come from the ground and just get onto those crops. So I don't think you ever actually want to crop any lower than about knee height like this. And you can see this is making very good use of vertical space with stuff up here. And you may need a little ladder to get to that, but that's actually fine. You're not harvesting up there, you're just accessing trays. So this is a pretty good layout of a system, just with a few sort of things that I would change to make it a little more sanitary overall. So here's another look at a shelving system indoors. I like this one in the sense that it's making a very good use of space. This one has some solid shelving in there, which I think is coroplast. But again, you want to try and avoid using wood in a situation like that. Again, this one, the trays there at the bottom are a little too close to the ground. I would have those up. And just little things like if you look here at the electrical here, we've got a power bar here and a power bar here. These are things, I always try to have my lighting and my cords come off to the side, up behind or up above. And this is to avoid any water getting on them. So your layout, your electrical layout and your lighting layout does need to be done really well, because electricity and lights and water don't mix well. So yeah, you want to really keep that in mind in terms of your design. So really having your plugs and everything off to the side in your system. So next we're going to take a look at using a greenhouse or a hoop house. So with the food peddlers, we evolved from using the benches, and you can see actually here we've still got them, we're using them a little bit, into a greenhouse situation. Now this is a unique greenhouse in that it's a converted shipping container, but it really like a more detailed greenhouse. There's a couple things that it has. So one is it's transparent, so it allows sunlight to come in. And I can't stress enough the importance of getting as much natural light as you can. It's consistent, it's free, and it's very good quality light. Actually, I'll take that back. It's a little inconsistent, but it's every day, but the quality of light is inconsistent. So in here, we've got the light coming in, natural light from the top and the sides, and from the back. And ours is set up so there's actually a building behind which can reflect some of that light back into the system. Then we've got heaters up here as well. So we have supplementary heat on the top, and we've got lights in here as well, which give us good extra light on cloudy days and in the winter when the days are shorter. And these lights are metal halides, so they actually generate heat as well. So actually 90% of the energy that goes into that type of light ends up being towards heat. And often with these systems, you're trying to remove that heat, but in our case, we're using that heat to heat things up. So I think on any given day, at full power between the lights and the electricity, this system will run about 1,500 watts worth of electricity at a time. So it would be all the heaters and all the lights going. And then the heaters are hooked up to a thermostat, so they come on and off as needed. The lights are also on a timer. And then there's fans in here and exhaust fans to keep good airflow in here. So this is where you're getting a really, really good amount of climate control like you would in an indoor system, but you have the added advantage of sunlight, which makes a really good quality product. In the summer, you'll have to do a little bit of mitigating the sunlight with shade cloth to keep the heat down. This greenhouse can get up to about 50 degrees Celsius if it's not managed properly. And in the winter, what's really interesting is you can get some pretty cold days, but if you do have some sun shining in here, that sun can heat things up really well. So the sunlight really acts as a power subsidy to keep things warm and to grow your crops. Here's just a look at some of the benches. So here we're using the epoxy-coated steel benches. These things are very, very common, and we use these, you know, after developing and designing some custom benches that were movable and whatnot, which would work really well but would be very expensive. And because they're so customized, selling them afterwards would be difficult. And these are very common restaurant use benches. So we knew that even if this model failed, we'd be able to sell this infrastructure. And we also knew we could use it for a long time. It would maintain some of its value because of the quality. So I think it was money well invested. You can see here we've got our main growing shelves. We've got 3 layers here. This bottom one about knee height, this one about chest height, and then one up above. And then we've got some intermediary shelves here. And what those are for is if there's a little bit of overlap between crops, we can actually have some crops right in that area as well. So that reduces light, but only just for a short time. So we can really, really maximize use of this space. And this greenhouse is split up into 2 sections. One where we've got germination happening and a little bit of extra heat, and then the other where the actual growing and this photosynthesis happens. So yeah, the greenhouse model works really well if you can do it. And this might be something you attach to a house as well to get some benefit there. So here's a look at a larger production system. So this is a very large greenhouse doing a pea shoot production. And this is one that has heated benches and is actually using aluminum trays to grow the microgreens on. So this is a good system again. This is much more capital intensive, but you can see the scale is much bigger. And using the heated benches and the aluminum trays allows you to have a nice warm root zone. And that really gives you very, very good crop production. And as the heat radiates up, you're going to have this nice little microclimate around the crop, even if the general greenhouse itself is fairly cool in the off season. You're getting natural light here, and then you can also have supplementary light. And this makes it really easy for watering and whatnot as well. So this is getting to another level for sure. But you can do pretty good production in a space like this, and the under tray heating goes a really long way. Here's just another look at that system. Here it is in the summertime. So there's actually mats up top there to create some shading. You can see there's some different crops there and some workers off to the side where they're starting to do some harvest of the crop there as well. This one is heated by, these are like concrete tables, and you've got hot water that goes through them. So it's a very, very efficient way to heat things. So hoop houses are another way as well. So hoop houses give you this advantage of being able to use the sunlight, and in this case actually being able to utilize vertical space, so you can grow stuff in the ground and then have the microgreens growing as well. The challenge with the hoop house is you've got a little bit of limited climate control. So you can control things a little bit by opening up the ends and putting in allowing air to flow through, and then using shade cloth to cool things down if you need to. So you don't have total climate control, but in terms of getting things, taking advantage of the sun and making use of space you're already using, it really can go a long way. So here's just another shot of a system like that as well. So a little blurry, but you can see we're really making use of that vertical space, which is one of the ways with microgreens we can really see some advantages in utilizing whatever square footage we have available to us. So here's just a review of some of the things that we want to consider with our growing spaces. The more climate control we have, the better. And we want to try and get as much climate control as possible. So the things we're looking at controlling are temperature, the light, the airflow, and the humidity. And we'll talk about that more as we move on. We really want things to be pest proof. One of the challenges with more outdoor-like production is once rodents find out about your crops, they can wreak havoc. One of the reasons is a lot of the seeds that you'll use are very high in protein, so they're a very desirable food source, and rodents can destroy a crop very, very quickly. You got to find the system that's right for your scale and right for your budget. And this is why I like the idea of starting off with the benches, which can be built very quickly and inexpensively. And the nice thing about going quickly with a system is, instead of thinking about where you're going to get the money for your system, is you're generating the revenue for your system. So you build a simpler system to start generating revenue from your crops, and then you can use that to scale up into maybe a hoop house or a greenhouse. And you can actually do combinations. So if you're in a colder climate, if you have a hoop house or a greenhouse, you can use the bench system within that. And so what you're doing is you're giving yourself a nicer working environment, and then within that you've got the benches where you can control the climate a little bit more. And one of the things you're often doing with these systems is just reducing the wind that moves through and removes the heat from things. So think about combinations there as well. In terms of multiple types of space, you can also have a space for germination and then a space for the actual growing and photosynthesis. The reason for that is the germination stage is very, very important in your production. And so if you get things off to a very, very good start and good germination, your growing conditions can be less than optimal and things will still do fairly well. What I find is if the germination stage doesn't go well, no matter how good your growing space is, it's hard for the crop to recover. So this is super important when it comes to off-season or winter production, is you can germinate stuff in a more concentrated space, get it off to a very good start, and then you just need 2 or 3 days in the light. And if that's in a cooler space or something with a little bit of limited climate control, at least things are off to a good start, and so they can do fairly well afterwards. The other thing is making your space so it's expandable by adding maybe more growing space vertically, adding another bench section, adding another hoop house, things like that. And what we're doing is we're planning for success here. You want to have an operation that grows. You're not going to start off growing 500 trays a week. That's something you're going to work up to. And so if you're starting off with 50 trays a week or 20 trays a week, how do you build that system if you're successful? And success can come pretty quick, because maybe you're doing a market and one restaurant, and then you get a restaurant or a market customer that wants to buy a bigger volume, and all of a sudden you need to be able to produce 20% or 50% or 100% more product, and you need to be ready for that. And so this is why I like some of these systems, because you can add them on very, very quickly. So let's take a look here at some of the equipment and some of the considerations in what we've looked at. You're going to need some type of irrigation. This can be on a timer, and I really recommend micro spray, but you can also do flood irrigation as well. You're going to need different lights and timers depending on your space. You're going to need a source of heat, and that might be gas or electrical depending on your system. Shelving is super important. I will continue to push you away from wood, even though it's very simple to work with. So in the beginning, maybe you're using wood. Consider that your prototype shelving and be prepared to move to more steel epoxy-coated shelving as you go. You're often going to need a cart or things to move trays around. This is going to be maybe moving from your germination area to your growing area, or from your growing area to your harvest area. You're going to need a thermostat to control temperature. That's what the shade cloth and the fans are helping do as well. And then you're also going to need cleaning supplies. You're going to need brooms and dustpans and detergent and sanitizer and things like that, mops. We use a wet dry vac in the greenhouse, so if there's any moisture on the floor, once or twice a day we suck that all up, and that really keeps the humidity down. And then you need some sort of pest control. You might seal things very well, but if pests do get inside, you need something to trap them. And once again, that's one of those things that a health inspector will look for, is what are your pest control measures. Your number one strategy is prevention, so keeping them out, and 2 is having some traps if they do happen to get in. Interestingly, the most likely place a pest is going to get into your system is through the same door that you do. So even though it might be sealed, all you have to do is leave a door or a window or a vent open, and they can get in fairly quickly. So that's a general look at growing space. There are some supplementary videos looking at what this space looks like, so take a look at those as well. And be sure to go and take a look at what other people's systems look like. And if you're already growing ground crops and stuff, think about how you can maybe modify some of the space you've already got to include microgreens in that.